The legendary real estate battle royal, Sega style. This is Sega Masters. Nothing like public domain music if you're in need of a quick intro theme, although I'm not sure Scott Joplin's The Entertainer fits with today's game. With the summer of the Sega sequel finally behind us, we move on to the critical fall of 1988, and up first is Monopoly, a Western exclusive title which was developed by Nexa for Sega and is indeed based on the most popular board game in the world. Most everyone has encountered Monopoly at some point in their lives, Parker Brothers' legendary game of wheeling and dealing that has delighted players and bred many conflicts since its debut in 1935. It would spawn numerous special editions and spin-offs, ultimately carving its own place in popular culture.
Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, and you must be the Monopoly guy. Hey, thanks for the free parking.
With its war with the Nintendo juggernaut raging in the US, Sega was no doubt betting that their console's library would benefit greatly from having such a famous name in its ranks. It wasn't too hard for them to snag the license since Tonka, Sega's distribution partner in the US for 2 years, just also happened to own Parker Brothers during this time as well. Sega originally advertised Monopoly for late 1987, yet the cart would go through some troubled waters during its extended development cycle, which are documented in greater detail in Ken Horitz's book, Playing at the Next Level. Sufficient to say, Gilman Louie's Nexa Corporation, whose previous work includes F-16 Fighting Falcon, was eventually given the nod to save the project, essentially making Monopoly the first cartridge for a Sega console developed by a North American company. After several delays, the first video game based on a board game finally saw the light of day in September 1988. Though still sporting the 1987 style box art. Sega's cart certainly wouldn't be the last time we'd see Monopoly on the video screen, as digital versions of the board game would eventually pop up on the NES, Genesis, Super Nintendo, PlayStation, and so forth, even recently on the Nintendo Switch. Not to mention other board games that would also see video versions of themselves appearing in console libraries. But the thing about digital versions of popular board games is they have to somehow convince gamers why they should play their favorite pastime on a video game console in lieu of just pulling the physical game out of the closet. Monopoly on the Master System faces the same handicap, and despite their best efforts, Sega and Nexa don't quite succeed in overcoming it. Upon starting the cartridge, you pick a token to act as your avatar on the game board, from cards and dogs to hats and thimbles, before registering your name. Then you pick your opposing tokens and whether each one is controlled by a fellow human player or the CPU itself. Plus each computer player can be set to one of 3 levels of intelligence. This Monopoly party can have up to 10 total participants with any combination of human and CPU players. After the roster is set up and the order of turns determined, the game finally begins in earnest with this basic representation of the game board tracking all the action. On your turn, you roll the dice and are treated as rather sweet close-up of your animated piece moving across the board to the appropriate space. Land on a property and you have the option to either purchase it or auction it off to the other players, but you must pick one or the other. The complex game menu then offers you more options to perform on your turn before you hand the dice over to the next player. And that's basically how this game unfolds. Roll the dice, watch your piece travel to the space, buy or auction the property, do something else on the menu, end your turn, repeat. Naturally, your main mission is to acquire as many assets as possible while driving all the other would-be tycoons into bankruptcy. To their credit, Sega and Nexa did a solid job of squeezing the board game into a cartridge, as everything you'd expect to find in a Monopoly game is featured. All the famous properties, utilities, and other spaces are present and accounted for, including the ghost spot that rewards you $200 for passing it, and even the iconic jail that you want to avoid going to. Of course, you also have the community chest and chance spaces, where you draw a card that could change your fortunes for better or for worse. Once you control an entire color block, you can build houses and hotels to drive up the value of your properties further, and thus collect more rent from whoever lands on your space. Other ways to wheel and deal your way to success include selling or trading your properties with the other players, and even mortgaging your assets if you're in need of quick cash. Seeing as how Monopoly sessions are known to last for hours, Sega actually provided a handy lithium battery in the cartridge, allowing you to save a game in progress and resume it at a later date. A customizable time limit can also be enabled, which will award victory to the player with the most assets once the timer expires. So yes, this cartridge features Monopoly in all its financial wrestling glory. And granted, it is nice not to have to worry about shuffling cards or losing little plastic pieces while letting the CPU handle the banking duties and calculations. But the fact is, much of the charm of playing the old-fashioned way on your card table is lost on the television screen, and this cart's presentation does very little to make up for it. Those who've played Monopoly video games on other consoles, such as the NES versions shown here, have seen how the programmers realized the need to keep gamers' attention by speeding up the board game's normally slow-paced action, while dressing it up with visually pleasing graphics and animation. As far as Sega's Monopoly goes, it just feels like most of Nexa's efforts went into the animated clips of your pieces traveling across the board, which admittedly do contain some nice details, such as the wheels turning on the car and the iron kicking up dust. Outside of those brief interludes, the visuals are mostly on the boring side, as all you really look at for the majority of the game is the simple rendition of the game board and a whole lot of black text on a plain white background with a few clip art images thrown in. You don't even get any illustrations of the community chest or chance cards when you draw them, just the text of what happens displayed on the screen. The only other cinematics are your houses being built and your token going to jail, and they merely consist of a couple of images on a plain colored background, which just seems lazy. Not much is featured in the way of audio either, just a few nondescript sound effects and some repetitive elevator music that plays non-stop in the background, but can thankfully be turned off. In fact, Sega's Monopoly features a number of hindrances you don't have to worry about with the real thing, including the cumbersome menu system you're forced to navigate in order to plan and execute your moves. Nexa also tried too hard to have the entire game board displayed on the screen at once, as its rather small size makes it difficult to see where your token actually is, as well as who owns which space. The CPU opponents are the only real feature to separate the cart from the board game. While they can be set to 3 different skill levels, they don't provide much of a challenge even on the highest setting. You'll mainly lose due to your own mistakes. And while Monopoly players are often known to tweak the rules to add their own twist to the action, this cart doesn't offer any customization options. You're stuck following the standard rules with no variations allowed. All in all, Sega's Monopoly does its intended job and is a respectable cartridge in its own right, but ultimately doesn't really do anything to convince you why you need Monopoly on your Master System in the first place. Its slow-paced gameplay won't win over any Sega diehards who thirst for quick arcade-style action, and its cause isn't helped by the lack of bells and whistles to keep players engaged. Even if you're a solo gamer that wants to compete against computer opponents, better video versions of the game are available on other consoles. Other than that, you're better off just sticking to the actual board game, since there's nothing here you won't find in the cardboard box in the closet.